Let's take a look at the champions who were buffed in patch 14.4. For Jarvan, one of the weaker junglers of Season 14, the passive cooldown will be reduced from 10 scaling to 8 seconds at later levels. Red Kayn has fallen off in Season 14 due to the dominance of lethality builds on Blue Kayn, so Riot plans to address this in 14.5. Red Kayn will receive a few buffs in this patch, with his passive healing now scaling with 0.5% per 100 bonus health, and the healing increased from 65% to 75%. Riot has some minor improvements lined up for Kog'Maw in this patch. The cast time of his Q ability will be changed from 0.25 seconds to now matching his auto attack windup speed. His E slow is increased by 10% at all ranks, and his minimum damage AP ratio is also increased from 65% to 75%. The 14.4 Rek'Sai changes landed quite poorly, so Riot has a bunch of follow-up changes for 14.5. The Fury damage of her E is increased from 6, scaling to 14% of maximum health, to 8, scaling to 14%. The monster cap of her E is increased by 15 in the early game. Her base damage is increased by 50 at all ranks. Her missing health ratio is increased by 5% at all ranks. And there are also a ton of bug fixes and quality of life changes being issued, as Rek'Sai has had a bunch of bugs in 14.4. Severe has been one of the more forgotten ADCs in recent patches, so Riot is throwing her a bone for 14.5 with a very minor buff, increasing her base armor from 26 to 30. Veigar has been a C-tier mid laner for the entirety of Season 14, so some buffs are finally headed his way. Veigar will now have more damage on his Q, with the AP ratio of the spell being increased by 5% at all ranks. His cooldown is buffed early on, but will stay the same at max ranks, as it's going from 120 to 100 seconds at level 6. A few Vex buffs are penciled in for this patch, with her passive base damage being increased by 10 at all ranks, and her passive AP ratio going up from 20% to 25%. These Wukong buffs may just be the most impactful changes of the patch. His passive stacks are being lowered from 10 to 5, but the bonus armor he gets per stack is being increased from 50% to 100%. So in other words, the value of the armor you get at max stacks will remain the same. However, you now reach max stacks much faster, which will make the skirmishes of Wukong so much more potent. Passive stacks will also now fall off just by 1 for every second after 5 seconds instead of all at once. Dreammaker shield strength is being adjusted from a 140 flat to 75 scaling to 255, with bonus damage altered from 90 flat to 50 scaling to 170. This change introduces a scaling buff to Dreammaker, making it slightly weaker early on. Heartsteel base damage is being reduced from 100 to 80, while the health ratio is increasing from 10% to 12%. Rocket Belt. Riot is adding burst strength to Rocket Belt by increasing its AP from 60 to 70. The item's cost is also increasing from 2,500 to 2,600 gold, but since 10 AP is worth about 200 gold, it's still an overall buff in terms of gold efficiency. Storm Surge. This item has seen a strange power shift, going from the most OP to the weakest in a few patches. Riot is giving it a small buff, increasing the movement speed from 5% to 8%. Celestial Opposition. A weaker support item upgrade, Celestial Opposition, is being buffed for 14.5. The cooldown is reduced from 20 to 18 seconds, the slow is increased from 50% to 60%, and the slow duration is extended from 1.5 to 2 seconds. Sunfire. Aegis. Base damage is increasing from 12 to 15, and the health on the item is getting a boost from 450 to 500. Frozen Heart. This item, which had a wild start to Season 14, is being hit with a second round of nerfs. The cost is increasing from 2,400 to 2,500 gold, while the armor is being reduced from 70 to 65. Lich Bane. Arguably the most OP AP item in recent patches, Lich Bane is receiving a nerf as the Spellblade AP ratio is dropping from 50% to 45%. Soul's Display. Changes from patch 14.4 ended up buffing the item substantially, so Riot is toning it down for 14.5. The cooldown is increasing from 20 to 30 seconds. Movement speed is dropping from 30% to 25%, and the bonus health is changing from 7%. Maximum health scaling to 250 to 230.